Lindsay here. I wanted to take you through one of my favorite photos that I recreate every year, apparently, for the last 2 years. This is my third year making this photo, so my third year in the house. We bought this house and it came with this pretty expansive shed. I love it. I turn it into a haunted house every single year, and every year before we set it up as a haunted house, I take a few photos in it before it's completely covered in trash bags and themed lighting. So this photo itself, let's go to details, because this is kind of this photo was kind of a tricky one to take, but I've learned over the few years how to take it better, and that's why I love recreating photos, because the first time I took it, it was not as in focus as I would have hoped for, because I use a vintage lens for this, and it tends to be less sharp than newer lenses. The glass in the lenses just isn't on par with what we have nowadays. So I took this with my D750, my 50 1.8. This is that vintage lens. I took this at 2000 ISO. So I did brighten this up a bit because, as you can see, we're literally sitting in a dark shed. And then I have it on f-stop 2.0. I do not have it wide open because it becomes way less sharp. As a vintage lens, the higher, the aperture, the more, the sharper that image will become on your subject. And also, this guy gets a lot of chromatic aberration when I have it wide open. And then I also have it on 1/125th seconds. And that's basically the setup of this. And I did shoot in RAW. Big, obvious, everybody should know this by now. Shooting in RAW will save your bacon later. So here is the lens and the camera that I used. So I underexposed this for a good reason, because I was trying to get this flare here. And you can see when I brighten it up, you can see that I was able to get this flare. Now, what I love most about this picture is I did stage it, obviously. I told Daisy to sit down by the pumpkin and have the light hit her face, and I knew I was going to get this flare. But here was a Christmas tree decoration that Saoirse accidentally knocked down, and it was right in my line of sight. But then I realized that light hitting off of those branches created this amazing bokeh that I wanted to incorporate, and I kind of loved that it was this accidental setup shot, and I just kept it because I loved that bit about it. So obviously here we're going to have a lot of color landing on Daisy, and whenever you're working with artificial lighting or you are doing these kind of themed pictures, you might be playing around with more colors, especially when you're using holiday lighting. So first off, I want to get rid of that red and make it a little bit more orange. And so all I'm going to do is pull my slider over. And then what I'm going to do is pull down my exposure, pull up my contrast, so I can pull out my darks, and you can see already this is looking way better. And this is just me hand editing. Then I'm going to pull down my blacks, because I do want this to seem a lot more mysterious than, fully lit or perfectly lit. I want to have this directional lighting on my daughter, and I want the focus to be on the pumpkin, and also I want your eye to travel around in a triangle motion with this photo. So we have my daughter set up here, and it is set up like a triangle composition, which is perfect. And I love that composition. It's one of my favorites to use. So what I do is play around with my slider until I get the exact tone that I want. I might even pull this down a little bit, the luminance, and just play with the saturation, pull up my saturation. Because I want this to be orange. It's Halloween, right? Yes, it is Halloween pretty much. So we're going to pull up my dehaze too, because I was taking a flare photo. I'm going to have a lot of haze. So this is what it looks like normally. And what I'm actually going to do is I want to keep the haze on that pumpkin. I'm going to pull a linear gradient. I'm going to pull it over my daughter. I'm going to put the dehaze over her. And I'm actually going to pull down all of this. And I'm going to pull it up to about here so I can make her dehazed a bit. And I'm going to pull down my sharpness and maybe a little bit of clarity and make it a little bit more less, what do you even call it? Less grainy. There we go. I can talk today, I promise. Then I'm going to take this radial gradient. I'm going to pull it over the pumpkin, and I want to pull up my clarity on the pumpkin and dehaze. Actually, let's keep that like this. Again, I'm experimenting, so I want this to be the focal point, obviously. It's Halloween. And there's that. And then I really want my blacks to be really, I feel like I'm kind of known now for my editing style with my strong blacks. And I usually pull down highlights just a little bit so it's not as jarring when you look at it. So you don't want it to be like completely overtaking your photo. You don't want the brightness to be, his eye is totally blown out. Let's pull it down just a little bit so we can still see that it's flaring. I love that. And one more thing, I love this bokeh on that tree that was accidentally dropped there. So I'm going to bring it out with some exposure, some clarity, maybe saturation and sharpness, just to pull that out just a little bit. Maybe the contrast, there we go. And now I'm going to take one more linear gradient and pull this up and make it a little bit darker so your eye is still pulled into this spot. So it kind of matches with this upper right side. It's going to match with the upper or the lower left. And that's just me being particular. I love how this looks now, except for I might come down here and pull up a little bit of noise reduction. I want it to be a little bit smoother. Maybe pull up sharpness and noise reduction. I don't like grain on this. I just don't. And I would call this done. Now, I did add one of my own presets. So this was me hand editing. I just did this all hand editing. And if I wanted to add a preset, this is what it looks like. I copied my preset with my preset. And then I think I pulled up the exposure. So pretty much the same. I actually like my hand edit better. So that's kind of funny. But that was just me hand editing. And I think practicing hand editing is so important because you should know how colors work with each other. You should understand color theory. You should know how to use those different tones to your advantage. And don't be stuck in a rut with a preset because especially when you're taking pictures like this, it can make you feel like you don't know how to edit your photo when you have to play with those different tones and those different lights and those different shadows. So, and eventually I might come in here and clone out those little bits of straw on the ground from when we were working over the summer, if I wanted to, or you could keep them. I think they're a distraction, so I want to get rid of them, and I would do a better job if I had a little bit more time. But yeah, I really like how this looks. One more thing you could do if you wanted is to pull in some light here, and I've done this in the past. Pull in some light here. Not that much light. And you could always add like some sparkles, like some dust or whatever in a overlay. And we could do that in Photoshop. But honestly, I kind of like the more organic way that I captured it. And I don't want to add any layers. I like to take pictures of what I see. And sometimes I'll add on and play in Photoshop. But for this particular one in this setup, I only wanted to use the pumpkin and it was cloudy out and I just played with what I had. So a lot of my photography ends up being experimental and that's what's so fun about it. Some things might not work, but the next day you might get something super duper amazing and I love that.